Have you ever witnessed someone shatter every expectation with a single act of brilliance? A former black sniper was ridiculed on the firing range until her 10 shots left the billionaire speechless. I think you've got the wrong place. The general services area is at the back, said the receptionist, a man in an impeccable suit who didn't disguise his contempt when he looked at Diane Wilson. In her 60s, with her gray hair carefully braided and her hands marked by time, she was a complete contrast to the luxurious atmosphere of the elite marksman club. No mistake, Diane replied calmly, placing a worn VIP card on the marble counter. I'm a special guest of General Roberts. The receptionist examined the card as if it were an obvious forgery. While discreet laughter echoed through the lobby, a group of men in designer tactical clothing watched the scene with growing amusement. This card expired 5 years ago, he said, giving it back with 2 fingers, as if he feared contamination. Besides, our field isn't exactly suitable for someone of her condition. Diane took the card back, her face impassive. Nothing there surprised her. Not the looks of disdain, not the barely concealed discomfort, not even the latent hostility. In his 40-year military career, 20 of which, as an elite sniper, she had faced worse expressions. The Elite Marksman Club was a modern temple dedicated to privilege. Located on an isolated estate, its glass and steel building housed the most sophisticated shooting range in the country. Members paid annual fees equivalent to the price of entire houses and had to pass an approval committee that rarely accepted anyone who didn't belong to the highest circles of society. General Roberts confirmed my attendance yesterday, insisted Diane. You can check the system. Reluctantly, the receptionist consulted the computer, his discomfort turning to surprise. Looks like there's a reservation, he muttered, unable to hide his annoyance. Lane 10, please sign here. As Diane signed the register, a middle-aged man approached. Alexander Morgan, a billionaire in the technology sector and the club's majority shareholder, was wearing a customized tactical suit that probably cost more than a car. Is this some kind of joke, Derek? He asked the receptionist, not bothering to lower his voice. Since when do we accept people like her? Mr. Morgan, she's a guest of General Roberts, the receptionist explained, visibly uncomfortable. Roberts and her charities, Morgan replied dismissively. First, it was that program for maladjusted veterans. Now this, he examined Diane from top to bottom. What do you do? Clean guns. Diane met his eyes. I use them, Mr. Morgan. Her answer provoked open laughter from the group forming around them. Morgan smiled, delighted with the situation. Did you hear that, guys? She uses them, he exclaimed to his friends. Well, since Roberts insists on these social inclusions, why don't we make it interesting? He turned to Diane. Do you know Alexander Dumas Challenge? Diane nodded. The challenge, named after the black French writer, was feared even by the most experienced shooters. 10 perfect shots in a row, each in the same exact position as the previous one, virtually forming a single hole in the target at 500 m. No one has ever completed the challenge, continued Morgan. Not even me. If you succeed, I'll pay her tuition for a whole year. If you fail, she smiled mischievously. Go back to cleaning the toilets. The audience laughed again. Cell phone cameras appeared, recording the moment. You're betting a lot, Diane replied reassuringly. Oh, don't worry. There's no risk, Morgan retorted, provoking more laughter. Derek, provide a gun for our guest. Something simple she can handle. As they made their way to the indoor area, the comments and looks of contempt continued. In the large main hall, sharpshooters practiced on luxuriously equipped stations. News of the bet spread quickly, attracting curious onlookers. The chief instructor, Trevor Powell, approached with an incredulous expression. Mr. Morgan, are you sure? This is a waste of time and ammunition. It's entertainment, Trevor. And a lesson in humility that our guest needs, replied Morgan. Powell handed Diane a basic rifle, visibly mismatched. The rules are simple. 10 shots, same point. 500 m. Any questions? Diane examined the gun carefully. Can I make some adjustments? Sure, if you know how, scoffed Powell, crossing his arms with precise, familiar movements. Diane began to adjust the rifle. Her hands, which many in the club considered too old, moved with the confidence of someone who knew every detail of that instrument. A young shooter, Sophia Chun, a national high school champion, watched with genuine interest. Why are they treating her like this? She asked the instructor next to her. Because people like her don't belong in places like this, he replied dryly. What no one in that elite club knew was that the hands that now adjusted that simple rifle had saved dozens of lives in operations that would never appear in official records. That those calm eyes had looked through sandstorms and moonless nights. That she, a 60-year-old woman whom they judged only by the color of her skin and her gray hair, or the scars of missions that would forever change the course of entire wars. Can you imagine the strength it takes to rise above such prejudice? Be sure to subscribe to Black Voices to find out how someone underestimated can turn humiliation into a lesson that no one will ever forget. It was impossible not to notice how Diane's hands moved with surgical precision over the rifle, as if the metal and wood were extensions of her own body. Morgan and his friends watched with growing disdain, interpreting her serene concentration as the nervousness of someone out of place. Maybe we should give her a bigger target, suggested someone in the audience, provoking further laughter, or reduce the distance to 10 m. Among the spectators, one man stood out for his silence. Unlike the others, Major James Foster wasn't smiling. His eyes followed Diane's every meticulous movement with a respect that was at odds with the general derision. At 65, the retired instructor recognized in her hands the discipline that only decades of military training could produce. "Ma'am, you have 1 hour to prepare," Powell announced, ostentatiously consulting his watch. "Unless you already feel prepared." The sarcasm in the last word was evident. No one there believed that this 60-year-old black woman could even understand the Alexander Dumas challenge, let alone complete it. 20 minutes will be enough, Diane replied calmly, testing the weight of the rifle in his arms. Morgan smiled dismissively. Confident for someone who's probably never seen a weapon of that caliber. "I've seen a few," Diane replied, her voice low but firm. "Nothing special." Those words provoked a momentary silence, soon replaced by even louder laughter. The audacity of that woman to challenge not only Morgan's status, but also his technical knowledge of weapons was unforgivable. 20 minutes then, agreed Powell. "After that, either you hit 10 perfect shots or you come back to clean our toilets." "Deal." As she walked away to prepare the field, Diane noticed Major Foster following her discreetly. When they were far enough away from the main group, he approached her. "Sorry about their behavior," he said, introducing himself. "James Foster. I've been an instructor here for 15 years. "Diane Wilson," she replied simply. "I've seen how you handle that rifle," Foster continued, lowering his voice. "It's not common. Military service." Diane hesitated for a moment, but something in the man's eyes, perhaps the same fatigue she felt when dealing with people like Morgan, made her trust him. 23rd Battalion, he confirmed. "Elite sniper for 20 years, 37 official missions." Foster nodded slowly, his eyes widening in recognition. "The Ghost of Fallujah," he muttered, using the code name that circulated among veterans. "I thought it was a legend." "Legends usually are," Diane replied, adjusting the rifle scope. "I prefer it that way." "They have no idea who you are," said Foster, a slight smile appearing on his wrinkled face. "Better that way." Foster looked around to make sure no one was watching them. "The rifle they gave you was deliberately unregulated. The sights are off by at least 2 degrees and the trigger has a response delay." "Got it?" Diane replied, continuing with the adjustments. "Nothing that can't be corrected." "I can help," Foster offered, pulling a small multi-purpose tool out of his pocket. "I have access to the warehouse. I can get you a decent scope to replace the damaged part." Diane considered the offer for a moment. "No," she finally decided. "I'll use exactly what I was given." Foster looked at her curiously. "Are you sure? This challenge is practically impossible, even with perfect equipment with this rifle." "Even better," Diane replied, a determined glint in his eyes. I want you to see what I can do with her leftovers. In the main hall, the mood was one of anticipated celebration. Morgan had opened a bottle of champagne, toasting the cleaning of the toilets, while others laughed and bet on how long Diane would last before giving up. I'll bet you 100 she can't even hit the target, offered Tyler Blake, a young investor who often accompanied Morgan. 200 that she cries after the third shot, replied another. Sophia Chun, the young shooter who had been watching everything with growing discomfort, approached Foster when he returned to the lounge. Major, this doesn't seem right, she muttered. They're treating her like a spectacle. Patience, Foster replied enigmatically. Some learn respect the easy way, others the hard way. The 20 minutes passed quickly. Morgan and her gang returned to the firing range, still laughing and taking bets on their impending humiliation. Powell held a clipboard with the official form for the Alexander Duma Challenge, which had never been completed in the club's history. Time's up, ma'am, she announced without hiding the disdain in her voice. Ready to give up? Diane calmly positioned herself at the 500-meter marker. The distance was impressive. Half a kilometer separated the shooter from a target the size of a dinner plate. I'm ready, she replied simply. The silence that settled in was different from the previous one. It wasn't the silence of restrained mockery, but the silence of expectation, albeit cynical. Morgan crossed his arms, his arrogant smile fixed on his perfect face. Powell activated the electronic system that would register each shot with millimeter precision. What no one at the Elite Marksman Club could have imagined was that behind those calm eyes and apparently fragile hands, there was a woman who had spent decades in the densest shadows of global conflicts. A sniper who, in her long career, had set records that remained classified in military archives that Morgan and his friends would never have access to. As she adjusted her position for the last time, Diane wasn't thinking about proving her worth to those people. She was thinking of her 12-year-old granddaughter, Zoe, who dreamed of becoming an Olympic shooter, but was constantly told that people like her didn't belong in the sport. And it was with Zoe's image in mind that Diane Wilson, known in military circles as the Ghost of Fallujah, took a deep breath and placed her finger on the trigger of the misaligned rifle she had been given to ensure his failure. The silence was absolute as Diane adjusted her position. Major Foster watched, arms crossed, a slight smile on his lips. Sophia Chun had stopped his own training, intrigued by the older woman's supernatural calm. At the VIP counter, Morgan and his friends were already toasting the impending humiliation. First try, announced Powell, his condescending tone echoing across the field. Whenever you're ready, ma'am. Diane didn't reply. His eyes focused through the misaligned sights, saw beyond the target. They saw distant deserts, moonless nights, moments when her precision had been the difference between life and death for dozens of soldiers. His fingers, which so many there thought were too old, knew the exact weight needed to compensate for the delay of the sabotage trigger. She took a breath, held it, she fired. The sound of the shot reverberated through the firing range. On the digital screen, the result appeared instantly. 10.0 perfect center. Beginner's luck, commented Tyler Blake, rolling his eyes. Diane reloaded. She adjusted her position again, compensating millimeters for the misalignment of the crosshairs. She took a breath. Held. She fired. 10.0, exactly. On the first shot. A murmur went through the group. Morgan straightened up in her chair. The champagne suddenly forgotten. Third shot, 10.0. Fourth shot, 10.0. Fifth shot, 10.0. Each bullet followed exactly the same path, creating a single hole in the absolute center of the target. Powell consulted the digital monitor repeatedly, as if hoping to find some error. That's impossible, she muttered, her arrogance faltering for the first time. Nobody hits 5 identical shots with a standard rifle. Sixth shot, 10.0. What's going on? Demanded Morgan, approaching the monitor. Check the system. There must be an error. There's no error, Mr. Morgan, replied the systems technician. After a quick check, the sensors are working perfectly. She's actually hitting exactly the same spot. Seventh shot, 10.0. Morgan's expression changed. Scorn gave way to incredulity and then to growing panic. The Alexander Duma challenge had never been completed in the club's 8 years of existence. She herself, with all her state-of-the-art equipment, had never made it past 6 consecutive shots. "Who is that woman?" asked Foster, who was watching calmly. "Wrong question, Mr. Morgan," replied the Major calmly. "The right question would be, why did you assume she couldn't be who she is?" 8th shot, 10.0. The entire hall had stopped. Other shooters had abandoned their practice. Staff approached discreetly. Even the club's general manager, a former colonel who rarely appeared on the field, emerged from his office. "Am I seeing correctly?" he asked, watching the monitor. 8 identical shots. 9, corrected someone as Diane hit the target again. Morgan was livid. Her bet made to humiliate had turned into her own public nightmare. Smartphone in hand, Tyler Blake filmed everything, broadcasting it live on the club's social networks. The video, initially intended to ridicule the cleaning lady, now documented a historic moment. For the 10th and final shot, Diane did something unexpected. She turned slightly and looked directly at Morgan, her calm eyes meeting his for the first time since the challenge had begun. The silence was so thick that the sound of her controlled breathing was audible. Without looking away, she raised her rifle, turned back to the target, and fired. All in a fluid movement that seemed impossible for someone of her age. 10.0 Alexander Duma challenge completed. The electronic scoreboard lit up in bright red. Record established. 100 out of 100. Dumas challenge completed. For 3 whole seconds, no one moved. Then Major Foster started clapping, followed by Sophia Chun. Gradually, the applause spread, growing in intensity until it became a standing ovation. Staff shooters, even some of Morgan's friends, joined in the celebration. "It's not possible," muttered Morgan, approaching the firing line. "You cheated." "You had to cheat, Mr. Morgan." Powell intervened, uncomfortable. "The censors have confirmed it. Every shot is registered." "There's no way." "I want a drug test. I want an equipment check." Morgan was frantic now, his face red with fury. "This is a farce. She can't. What?" Mr. Morgan interrupted the general manager, approaching with a stern expression. "She can't be better than you. She can't have ability because she's black, because you're a woman, because you're 60. The video continued to broadcast live, capturing every word. "You don't understand," Morgan insisted, stepping back. "She appears out of nowhere." "And Colonel Diane Wilson," Foster announced, her voice now carrying the authority that years of military command had cultivated, "didn't appear out of nowhere. She served this country for 40 years, 20 of them as the best sniper our Special Operations Force has ever had." The silence returned, heavier than before. "The ghost of Fallujah," muttered someone. "I thought he was a legend." Diane finally lowered the rifle, his face calm. "I'm not a legend. I'm just someone who's worked hard," he said simply. "Like any serious shooter." 22 decorations, Foster continued. 17 military records, most of them still classified. "And you had her cleaning toilets." The contempt in her voice was evident. The general manager approached Diane, holding out his hand. "Colonel Wilson, it's an honor to welcome you to our club. Elite Marksman would like to offer you an all-expenses-paid lifetime membership." Tyler's smartphone cameras captured Morgan's shocked expression, his empire of arrogance crumbling live for thousands of viewers. The man who had arrived ready to humiliate a lost old black woman was now facing her own public humiliation. "What about our bet, Mr. Morgan?" asked Diane calmly, placing the rifle on the table. "I believe you owe me an annuity," Morgan swallowed, aware of the cameras and the stares. "Of course," she replied stiffly. "A deal's a deal." "Actually," Diane continued, "I'd like to modify the terms. Instead of paying for my association, I'd prefer you to fund scholarships for young shooters from underprivileged communities. Starting with my granddaughter, Zoe." What no one in that exclusive club could have predicted was that those 10 perfect shots would only be the beginning. As the video spread virally and sports commentators discussed the extraordinary feat, something much bigger was in the making. A transformation that had begun with a humiliation and would end up redrawing the foundations of an entire sport. Because when the privileged face their own prejudices reflected in the relentless mirror of excellence, it's not just records that are broken, but entire barriers that crumble. The video documenting Diane Wilson's 10 perfect shots went viral within the first 24 hours. What had begun as an attempt to humiliate her became the catalyst for a silent revolution in the world of shooting sports. 6 months later, the elite marksman club was unrecognizable both in its facilities and its philosophy. The Colonel Wilson New Talent Program received 2 more sponsors today, announced Major Foster during the monthly ceremony. This brings us to 50 full scholarships for young people from marginalized communities. Diane, sitting quietly in the back row, watched with satisfaction. Her granddaughter Zoe, now a regular at the club, had just won her first regional youth championship. On the podium, young people from different social and ethnic backgrounds represented a new generation of shooters who would never have set foot in that place 6 months earlier. Alexander Morgan had kept her promise, although not by choice. The viral video had exposed not only the prejudice in the club but also questionable practices in her companies. Subsequent investigations revealed systematic discrimination in hiring and promotions. Her company's shares plummeted and 3 of her biggest clients canceled contracts. Morgan rarely appeared at the club now. When he did, he occupied a discreet corner without the entourage of sycophants that used to surround him. His empire of arrogance had crumbled in real time in front of millions of online viewers. It was never about humiliating him, Diane explained to a reporter interviewing her for a sports magazine. It was about opening doors that were unfairly closed to people like my granddaughter. The scholarship program, initially reluctantly funded by Morgan as part of the deal, now had the support of several companies and sports personalities. The shooting range, once an exclusive enclave for privilege and ostentation, had become a center of genuine excellence. Trevor Powell, the chief instructor who had mocked Diane, now coordinated a training program for military veterans with war trauma. Colonel Wilson taught me that skill has no age, color, or gender, he admitted during a training session. It was the most important lesson of my career. Sophia Chun, the young sniper who had watched everything with discomfort, was now training under Diane's direct guidance. She taught me that true precision begins long before you touch the gun, commented the young woman, who had become a spokesperson for the new diversity program. To the surprise of many, Alexander Morgan's son, who had witnessed his father's public humiliation, became one of the biggest advocates of change. I grew up believing that talent was a product of privilege, he confessed in an interview. Colonel Wilson proved me wrong. The old military rifle that Diane had used on that historic day now took pride of place in a special display case at the entrance to the club. Below it, a simple plaque told its story, not just that of the weapon, but that of the woman who had wielded it for decades in service to her country, often overlooked and underestimated because of her color and gender. True authority doesn't come from how much money you have or who you know, Diane said in her increasingly sought-after lectures. It comes from quiet excellence cultivated day after day when no one is looking. General Roberts, who had secretly planned Diane's historic visit to the club, smiled as he saw the transformations. Sometimes change only happens when the system is confronted with an undeniable truth, he reflected. And there is no truth more undeniable than 10 perfect shots. Diane Wilson's story has transcended the world of shooting sports in universities, corporations, and military institutions. She became a symbol of the fight against veiled prejudice and institutionalized discrimination. His name was invoked when people were underestimated because of their appearance, age, or origin. At the age of 60, when many were planning to retire, Diane began a new career as a speaker and mentor. Her message was simple. The best response to discrimination is not loud confrontation, but quiet excellence. And what about Alexander Morgan? He lost much more than a bet that day. He lost the illusion of superiority that had sustained her identity for decades. In her rare public appearances, he seemed smaller, as if Diane's 10 perfect shots had pierced not only the target, but also the armor of privilege that had protected him all his life. The last time he was seen at the club, he was silently observing the class Diane was teaching to young shooters from different backgrounds. His eyes, once cold and condescending, now seemed to seek an understanding that had come too late. In a world where so many are underestimated because of their appearance, age, or origin, excellence is the most powerful response we can give, Diane teaches his students. It's not about revenge. It's about transformation. If this story of overcoming and transformation has touched your heart, sign up to follow other inspiring stories about extraordinary people who, even when underestimated, have changed the world around them not with empty words but with the silent irrefutable power of their actions, only on Black Voices.